and welcome to Diverse and Inclusive Leaders, the show where I speak with the most inspirational and thought-provoking leaders of today and unearth their unique stories of diversity and inclusion to help inspire, educate and motivate others to make the world a better place. Today, I am thrilled to be joined by Dr. Rania Marandos. She is the Chief Executive of Step Up to Serve, the charity that coordinates the #IWill campaign. She's unbelievably passionate about young people's roles in creating positive, sustainable change across society through the power of cross-sector partnerships. Interestingly, Rania actually started her career at the London Probation Service and then focused on large-scale capability building programs across a range of industries at McKinsey and Company. She's also the governor and chair of the Education Committee of 2 primary schools and mentors charity leaders via the Cranfield Trust. Welcome to the show, Rania.
Thank you so much for having me.
Tell me a little bit about, I guess almost how you came to be where you are today. For those of our listeners, perhaps who don't know you as well as I or the team here do, the career's been fascinating, kind of littered with many different things along that path, and it'd be really wonderful just to hear how all of that came about and whether it's, I guess something that you always thought you would end up doing, or whether this was a piece that was very much a holistic and organic kind of journey.
Very much the latter. I was going to say journey actually is a really good word and a bit of an adventure as well. I think I can trace it back to when I was growing up in Greece actually, and I was very lucky to be exposed from an early age to a number of opportunities to volunteer and help out in my community. Something that at the time I didn't take much notice of, but it certainly helped me in so many ways in terms of developing skills, networks, making friends, having fun, doing something a bit different outside of school. And I think the bug was caught at an early age for me. I really wanted to help people. That informed my decision to go and study psychology at university. And that's when I moved to the UK, which is where I was actually born. So lovely to kind of come home in a certain way, and through my studies, I developed an interest in the criminal justice system, and in particular, looking at prevention and how we can essentially create a society that is much better for everyone. And that journey took me to the London Probation Service very early on in my career, where I did a PhD looking at victims of crime actually, and the trauma that experience creates, how you can identify ways to help people at that stage, and really kind of develop a criminal justice system that is looking holistically at everyone. And there's a lot of press and discussion about what we do with offenders and very much victims of crime at the time, and I think since then that's still the case, are sometimes ignored to a certain degree, or not as much investment is put in. So that was the beginning of my career, and a really interesting piece of research that I had the privilege of developing alongside colleagues at the Probation Service, and then took a bit of that kind of journey, a bit of a turning. So McKinsey and Company was something I didn't expect I would end up doing, becoming a consultant, but it was certainly one of the best schools I've been to. An opportunity to work with so many different people across different countries, industries, and learn how to develop ideas and make them a reality, and understand the different layers of an organization, especially big organizations. We were so lucky to be able to work with people on the ground who were developing systems and processes, the kind of middle management, the senior leadership, often mergers and acquisitions, so kind of international components as well. So lots of different experiences that always brought me back to people and how to help people. So whatever industry I was in, that is the bit I enjoyed, and working with lots of different people, bringing different perspectives into developing solutions that will stick, because that's the important thing. You mentioned at the beginning, kind of sustainable change. How do you make something stick? And if you've got a few people in a room creating a strategy that they then deliver to other people to implement, in my view, that's never, ever going to work. So my passion has always been how you can work alongside people of different backgrounds, ideas and perspectives, and shape something together that will work for an entire organization, an entire community and society. So yes, that's the beginning. I could go on, and I think we're going to talk about my entry into the charity sector, which is where I always wanted to be. So very lucky to have those kind of two early experiences of working in the public sector and the private sector that then I think created that launch pad for me to hopefully have some sort of impact in the social sector, which is where my passion lies.
Wow, Rania, thank you so much for sharing. And, what I love, first and foremost is, when you talk about people and you talk about how holistic this is, you also, mention how actually, there are a lot of similarities across various different sectors, despite the fact, I think, people often get, kind of clouded by the fact that, we must stay in certain sectors. Actually, people are what is consistent across the entire board when it comes to the various different sectors. I love that you talk as well, about some of the probation work. I think, the skills that can be gleaned from working within these areas are ones that make a huge impact across often, other areas of life. I remember working for the Samaritans for around about 3 years in some of my earlier days, and we used to go into prisons actually, and train up listeners to make sure that they were able then to pass that knowledge and kind of coaching almost on to other individuals within the prison. And you just think, wow, those experiences, whilst it seems so incredibly far away from even business or McKinsey, who's one of the top consultancy firms in in the world, actually they are skills that are so incredibly applicable to other sectors.
And I'm glad you mentioned listening, actually, because that's one of the biggest kind of, I suppose, drivers of creating change, being able to listen effectively and then absorb all those different perspectives. And certainly a skill that I learned whilst being a consultant, and how you then synthesize that input to create solutions and take people on a journey, because that's the other important aspect of creating change. It doesn't happen overnight, and it shouldn't, because you need everyone around that change to understand it, embrace it, and be kind of part of it, be co-creating it, actually.
I think the power of storytelling absolutely cannot be underestimated. As you say, it is what makes people have that feeling that they take away and remember, which ultimately drives them to hopefully positive action, which I think is a really great segue into talking a little bit more about some of the work that you're doing at the moment, because seeing the hashtag I Will campaigns and a piece you've done in particular around anti-racism, which I think is superb. Talk to me a little bit about the power of the Youth Charter and some of the campaigns that you've been working on and the impacts that they had.
So yes, I mean that my first step into the social sector was actually via an education charity called Teach First, and it was partly because I through my work in the criminal justice, I was clear that education and starting early, working with young people, is really important if you want to create any change across society. And our teachers are really, really important. And especially at the moment, I want to say that the work that they're doing under very difficult circumstances is just so inspiring. When I was at Teach First, we were very clear that, the focus there was how do we make sure that every child, every young person has the opportunity of a great education to reach their potential, and that to have nothing to do with their background. And particularly we were looking at socioeconomic background, which drives a lot of the outcomes for young people, especially in the UK. And we knew if we were to make that shift, that we had to work collectively across sectors, actually, and developed a set of very ambitious goals for young people that weren't just for Teach First as a charity to achieve, but actually getting collaborations across schools, business world, other charities to enable more young people from low income backgrounds to be able to reach their potential. And that work links really well to my entry into what is now the I Will campaign, which is all about empowering young people, recognizing their role across society, and that actually, if we want to solve our biggest societal issues, environmental challenges, climate change, the climate emergency, I feel we need to work with young people as equal partners, and not see young people as just on a journey, a learning journey to develop their leadership potential for later on, but actually recognize that while someone is young, there are certain perspectives, skills, that kind of creativity that young people bring that we need at that point in time. And it's an aspect of diversity I'm not sure we talk about as much. We talk a lot about, and quite rightly, gender diversity, and I've been in environments that are too dominated by one gender throughout my career, and that still needs a lot of work. And obviously more recently, and you mentioned the work we've been doing on tackling anti-Black racism, there is still a huge challenge in terms of ensuring that, especially in the leadership of organizations, we're involving and including people from all backgrounds, all races, all perspectives. But I think we also need to be talking about age and making sure that young people, whilst they're young, are part of decision-making structures, are part of the change we want to see, and that we take them more seriously. I think we would all benefit. And I'm talking at a young age as well, children. So under 10, a lot of our work has been with primary schools. You know, spending even half an hour with young people in primary school can inspire you to really believe that we can do anything in the world. And shouldn't more of us as adults and kind of older people be exposed to that kind of ideation? I believe we should.
Well, there's so many rich things that you talked about there, and I particularly like that you mentioned there, you know, ultimately visible and invisible diversity, because this is about being holistic. It's not just about the things that we see above the surface, you know, whether it be kind of gender, whether it be race, you know, whether it be a physical disability, but it's also about those things, as you mentioned, that sit below the surface. What background, you know, did individuals come from? If it is an impoverished background, how can we ultimately drive equity to ensure that those individuals have the right opportunities, you know, the best opportunities, and are equal to others from different demographics. And so the notion here, when you're talking about kind of starting earlier in schools, I think is just absolutely, it is the right way to go. Now, I recall kind of being, you know, growing up in Yorkshire, actually, for most of my childhood. And, you know, in terms of, you know, the education, yes, it was wonderful, and I think there was privilege in many ways, actually, you know, but I do think, you know, if we were to learn more at school and at those tender, very influential ages, shall we say, where actually, you know, we're almost like sponges, aren't we? You know, everything that we take in, everything that we absorb, you know, it does actually have that huge impact later on in life. Had we have learned, you know, a little bit more about the power of kind of diversity and inclusion and some of those historic systemic elements, it would serve us far better going out into the real world, in inverted commas.
Absolutely. And I think that's where youth social action and volunteering opportunities come in. It's a brilliant opportunity for young people to be exposed to lots of different activities that maybe, you know, sometimes can happen within a school environment, but also outside of a school environment, and will mean that they'll get the chance to work with peers that maybe they wouldn't get to do under normal circumstances, or other people in their community. We've done a lot of work in the health system, for example, working across NHS trusts that looked at how they could involve younger volunteers, and they did brilliant work consulting with young people themselves and the local schools and youth groups to really understand what was going to work. And they made some changes to the way that they worked with volunteers to be able to embrace that younger age group. More flexibility was one of those changes, shifting the way that they recruited. So instead of asking for a CV and interviewing in the kind of standard way, creating some more interactive ways of recruiting volunteers and assessing the suitability. And what they found is that young people and young volunteers have been embraced within those environments, which is fantastic, and have contributed so much across these NHS trusts. But they also started to see that by making those changes, Older volunteers also benefited, and they were able to see more diverse cohorts of volunteers coming through. So I think when we put that lens on of how do we create an inclusive environment for the younger age group, often what we end up with is enabling more diversity in other ways as well, which I think is really, really exciting.
And how can organisations get involved? Because I think it's critical when we think about our youth of the future, and almost, as a good friend of mine would say, Herman Stewart, it's almost utilising, whether it be mentoring, whether it be young people, almost as a strategic kind of priority with companies. How can organisations, and why should organisations be really thinking long and hard about embracing our youth in order to drive sustainability for their businesses? What's in it for them, in inverted commas?
We talk a lot about the double benefit of youth social action, and sometimes the triple benefit. So when young people are more involved in society and in the range of ways that you can make a difference. So often we talk a lot about volunteering, but it can be through campaigning, through fundraising, through peer-to-peer mentoring, and supporting your community using your creativity and innovation. So it could be a startup project that doesn't exist already. That benefits young people. We have lots of evidence that it develops young people's skills, their exposure to professions that maybe they wouldn't have had. It helps with that journey into employment at a later stage, helps create networks and well-being, really, really important, especially during the times we're going through at the moment. But there are also benefits, obviously, to the community, to the actions that they're taking. And then thirdly, which is the question you were asking, to the organizations that are involving young people in so many different ways. And for a business in particular, I think creating a pipeline of potential customers in the future, but also potential employees of the future, and also a perspective that they need to have. It's really important to be understanding that the young generation, if you're developing products and services that are meant to be available to everyone across society. And it's often that segment that is missed out in any consultations or decisions that are made, whether we're talking in the private sector, public sector, or even across the voluntary sector. So starting to think, what can they do? You mentioned the Power of Youth Charter earlier, which is relatively new. We launched it in the autumn, and we shaped it with a number of I Will campaign partners from across sectors, as well as I Will ambassadors, who are young people who've been working really closely with us and are fantastic examples of what's possible when young people are empowered to find their passion and make a difference in their communities. And it creates a bit of a framework that will support organizations to look differently at the way that they think about young people. And it's not only relevant to those organizations who already work with young people. I think anyone can start to partner with young people in different ways. And there are a number of actions that we're asking organizations to take. You talked about prioritization. So I think the first is, how do you prioritize working with young people within your strategy, and properly understanding for your own circumstances what the benefits will be collectively for everyone involved. And then how you can involve young people in your decision making and governance structures. We've had over the years so many brilliant examples now of young people joining boards of trustees, becoming youth advisors. The NHS is a brilliant example where they've got 2 youth advisors and younger members of the NHS Assembly. So young people are around the tables that are making decisions and are not seen as separate, someone to consult and then talk about, actually. And I think that's really important. How do we make sure that young people are in the very rooms where decisions are made and those important discussions are being had? And then really thinking about how organizations can partner with others. We're not suggesting that everyone should become the expert in engaging young people. There are a number of organizations who are doing that brilliantly across the youth sector, the education sector we were talking about earlier. So for companies in particular, I think it's how do they look at what's in their community already, the locally or kind of national organizations as well, that can support them to engage young people and start to bring them into the work that they're doing, and then celebrate. It's so important to obviously understand the impact, and I know that's important for a lot of businesses, of engaging young people and working with them to support communities and the issues that businesses are also trying to solve. So collecting that data and being able to have a kind of good story on the impact you're shaping, but then also celebrating young people and recognizing what they bring to society, I think is really, really key. And having that kind of affirming function that will continue to kind of spark that light that we often see in young people when they find that they're able to make a change.
It's innovation, isn't it? And it's thinking outside of the box. And, when you mentioned that, having young people in the boardroom, I mean, just wouldn't that be so much more wonderful if we saw that happen on a more frequent basis? And not just in the sense that, oh, this is lip service for big corporates. Oh, it'd be nice to have someone who's young here and we consult them, as you said, almost outside of that bubble or outside of the confines of the boardroom, as it were, but actually involving them in some of the decision-making process, because ultimately those are our leaders of the future. It's about inspiring, educating, motivating, giving them and equipping them the tools with what they need to ultimately drive a better world. And I know there was something that you mentioned, there that kind of really, really resonated with me is, that this is, it's not just about saying, we involve young people and that's great and kind of keeping them on the periphery. It is actually how can we utilize them in a positive way to inspire genuine positive change. And I think I'd be interested to get your take on how you see the future of the workplace, because we've started to see a bit of a sea change when it comes to businesses with purpose. And I don't mean that in the kind of the twee kind of, the Dilbert Bland kind of, oh, it's a business with purpose kind of way. Actually, I think we all know why purpose is incredibly important to businesses. But I think there is our youth of the future will not stand for organizations that don't genuinely care about this as a subject matter. And that much is obvious as well, what with social media and what with being able to really kind of scratch below the surface and see into, lives of others and businesses like never before, especially in this digital environment.
Yes, I mean, we're all looking for businesses with purpose, I think, and young people in particular. So I'm glad you're seeing that real change, and I'm hopeful actually with some of the things that we've seen recently that young people have played a leadership role in, and that includes the young people who have been protesting to make sure that we do take climate change seriously. And that's something that business has a key role to play in and would benefit from involving young people to really understand how can we actually make those changes as a society that are needed and that business needs to make to make sure we are protecting our natural world. And more recently, through the Black Lives Matter movement, young people, it's not just young people, but young people have played a crucial role. And the way we responded as a campaign to the need really to take this even more seriously and think through what next and what action should we be taking as an organization, but also stimulating across the partnership. The first people we talked to were young people, and we brought together our young Black I Will ambassadors. They've now created a group that we've been facilitating to help them make sense of what was happening first and foremost. So there's definitely a piece around well-being and enabling young people to connect with each other and have discussions about what next, but then to inform us as an organization and start to stimulate action across an even bigger group of organizations so that we can actually see meaningful change. And young people have been so brave. They've come into rooms that are really difficult to come into and shared very openly their experiences and often have had to have really difficult conversations that they shouldn't have to have, but they've stepped forward and brought that kind of courage to the conversation where they've not taking the status quo as something that they have to accept, and I'm so proud of what they are able to do at such a young age, and how they're able to speak up in front of politicians and leaders of companies. We had a board of trustees meeting in October, and some of our young Black ambassadors joined that. And it's not easy to join a room, and it's a digital room nowadays, but a room of all these people that you don't know, and share your personal experiences and your views and perspectives in terms of what needs to happen, and what we as leaders, all of us, need to do to tackle anti-Black racism. And I don't think we could be making the change we need to without involving young people. And my view is that applies to every single issue that a company, organization, or society is trying to tackle.
So powerful. And the campaigns as well, which I've seen that you've done, are so incredibly, that they're so touching, they're so inspiring. I think there was a piece that I'd seen. It said something like, "You're never too young to make a difference," and that is literally almost what you've encompassed with everything you were saying there. Is you can never be too young to make that change. And goodness, the inauguration last night, which I'm sure you saw, wow and wow. When it comes to the power of the youth, oh my goodness, the poem, just literally, it brought tears to my eyes. And it makes me think almost, it's not the things that people say or what they did, it's how you make them feel that is what you take with you, and what you remember, and what it is that ultimately drives you to make positive change. And so I love that you've talked about the storytelling and some of the power there that this and these initiatives, I should say, drive, in particular with campaigning for anti-racism, and particularly for our Black communities and future Black leaders. And I guess, just because I'm conscious of time, and I was really keen to ask some other questions also about you, because I think, you look at your background, and it's been, you've touched on so many great things there. Obviously, the campaigns that you're driving right now are also wonderful. But I wonder, before we kind of wrap up, whether we could talk a little bit about what diversity, inclusion, and belonging, and equity, in fact, because it's starting to get longer and longer. And I think, when it comes to D&I and B and E, it's it's an ever evolving journey that is constantly growing arms and legs and extra heads and things like that. But I wonder, what does diversity and inclusion mean to you personally? Because I appreciate it can mean different things to different people.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I've throughout my life been thinking about, but in different ways, as you say. I think our experiences build over time, and increasingly my view is that we absolutely need to change the way the society is built, because it has a lot of the way we live at the moment has been built by a minority of people, and often a minority of perspectives or people of certain backgrounds, and we miss out the kind of the richness that exists across society. So, I mean, I know this is unrealistic to say. We can't kind of break everything and start over, but I do think we need to do something radical and relook at the way we involve people in shaping the way we live, rather than expect that it's okay for a small minority to shape the structures in organizations, even, or the stories that are being told. I think that's really important, and then the media has a really key role to play here to make sure that the platforms, and I am seeing evidence that it's starting to happen, but even more needs to be done to make sure that there are platforms for people of all backgrounds, perspectives, ages to share their ideas and what they're thinking, so that we're not kind of limited by the way things are. And that's why I really believe bringing that fresh perspective from young people is key. You get naturally, I would say, more diversity when you start to talk to young people. And we've been able to build the diversity of our conversations through young people. I don't think that's the only answer, but I think for companies that are looking to increase diversity, starting to bring young people in will be one way going forward. So I'm optimistic, but I think quite a lot has to change, and we have to go beyond. I think representation is important. I think creating inclusive environments where everyone is feeling comfortable is important. But in order to do that, we need the creators of those environments to be more diverse, and we need to rethink. Very small example. We've been talking about diversity on boards. We mentioned it earlier, I think, as well, and that is not just about trying to access different people to join a board. I think we also need to look at the functions of boards and how they work, how they make decisions, and how they're able to include different perspectives. It's not enough to just have the people sitting around a table. You need to change the way the conversation is taking place. If you send out, hundreds and hundreds of pages of paperwork that is really difficult to navigate, that's not just difficult for a young person who joins your board. It's probably difficult for a lot of people. For me, I wouldn't find that easy. And I think we just need to change the way we do certain things that have stuck because they were designed quite a long time ago when things were different.
Picking up on one of the pieces that you said there is that we need, because this is systemic, right? It's almost, it's equality, it's equity, rather over equality almost. And I'm often asked what the difference is and why equity over equality is more important. Look, both obviously promote fairness, but what you're mentioning then I completely concur with, is the fact that look, we do want to get to that point where everyone is treated the same, but there needs to be a really deep understanding of the fact that equity achieves this through understanding the specific different backgrounds that people or certain groups have come from, and then ultimately leveling that playing field. Because as you say, there is a richness of diversity at those grassroots levels a lot of the time. And when you look at that in organizations, the same is true. Numbers could and can be skewed by diversity with race when it comes to entire organizations. You then look at the boardrooms and you look at the C-suite minus 2, 3, 4, 5. You look at the C-suite at the top and later on levels, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they ultimately are not representative of the wider community. And so it is, as you say, there's not one silver bullet, but it's a multifaceted approach to get there. This is one very, very good way to build that long-term sustainability, because we've got to keep feeding that pipeline. Otherwise, we forever will have that gap in the middle. And right now it is a gaping gap from grassroots to board level. So thank you very much for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing as well the kind of the difference that we need to be taking into account in terms of equality and equity. And our IWIL ambassadors have been brilliant at describing that, articulating it really powerfully, and how important it is to recognise the barriers that are faced by so many people, and that we do need to be giving that step up. It's not enough to say that everyone, is given the same opportunities. Actually, we need to recognise that more support is needed and come together as communities to provide that. And if we look at business, actually thinking about how they interact with communities, because actually they're there to serve communities. And if they're seen as separate, if they see themselves as separate to communities, I don't think ultimately they'll be achieving their ultimate goals.
Absolutely. Rania, before we run out of time, I've got to ask a couple of little lightning round questions. I'm going to start with the hardest one first. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to answer each, if that's okay. On the clock. No, you can have a little bit longer if you need. Hardest question first, and that is, what is your secret to success, or indeed does success exist, I guess?
Something I'm passionate about. I don't know if it's a secret to success, but certainly throughout my career, working in partnership, and I couldn't recommend it more highly. It means I enjoy my job thoroughly, because bringing people together and recognizing the different perspectives we were just talking about, and creating often unusual partnerships is really exciting and can lead to that innovation and change and systemic change we've been talking about.
And how about authentic leadership? What does that mean to you?
For me, it comes back to values and really spending time considering as a leader what your values are, and they can change over time. You learn a lot as you go through your career and through the people around you. But spending time recognizing your values, communicating those values, and trying to live by those values, work by those values, and be true to those values.
And finally, I wonder if you could go back in time and talk to your young self, as it were, or indeed someone who's in a similar situation. You know, perhaps it's one of the youngsters on one of the various campaigns that you have who's in a similar situation. What advice would you give to yourself?
I have to go back to my younger self often in my job and remember what it was like, and having been inspired by the young people we spend time with, and it's been such a privilege for me to work on a campaign that gives me the opportunity to talk to young people on a regular basis and spend time with them and go to meetings with them. It makes those meetings much more fun, but also huge impact from the young people themselves. So I would say to me, back when I was younger, to speak up much more readily than maybe I did, and to really believe that the views I had at that point were valid enough. As a young person, you don't need to wait to grow up or to become that future leader to make a difference. As you said earlier, it's never too young to make a difference, and sharing your ideas, perspectives, whatever your age, and being confident that you have something to offer is really, really important.
Rania, thank you so much. It's been an absolute joy having you on the show, and there's been so many nuggets of wisdom there. I love watching and following the work that you do, and I, as usual, will give a little brief summary on some of the key learning points from the session, of which there have been many. And I guess first and foremost, to organisations out there, really do think hard and consider our youth for the future. It is imperative not only for business strategy, but also for driving the pipeline of our diverse and inclusive youth for the future. We owe it to ourselves as well personally to be allies in this movement for positive change. I love the fact that you were talking about your diverse background as well, Rania. I think when we dig kind of deep into other areas and other sectors, whether they be public, private sector, also the pieces around kind of working in some of your earlier days within probation services and things like that. I think their skills are so applicable to other industries, so would absolutely encourage anyone who's listening today to get involved in working or even volunteering within other sectors, because I think it's so valuable to business and to life in general. And finally, if anyone would like to, go through any of the notes from today, don't worry. Or if you didn't catch everything, we'll put everything into the show notes at the end of today's show. I would encourage you to reach out as well to Rania, and also check out Step Up to Serve. You can reach out and take a look at what Step Up to Serve is doing with their hashtag I Will campaign, and you can visit us as well at www.darglobal.org/podcast. We'll put all of the details in there so you can reach out directly. But thank you so much again, Rania. Honestly, been superb today, and I think just keep on doing all the great work that you're doing, inspiring the future and ultimately driving businesses to succeed and really develop their futures holistically.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Leila.
Thank you so much for watching the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast. Please do feel free to hit the like button below, or if you'd like to receive future notifications, do ping the notification bell here at the side. If you're interested in the audio version only, you can find it on the following streaming platforms. Any extra info and descriptions will be in the links below. Look forward to seeing you soon.